Chapter 6 is going to help us answer some of the questions between chapters 4 and 5, because if you remember, chapters 4, law of demand, and chapter 5, the law of supply, don't seem to go together. What those tell you is that as a price increases, demand will go down as supply goes up. And then if the price increases, supply will go up, but demand will go down. And it seems that those are going in opposite directions and that they can't possibly work. Thankfully, we have chapter 6. We have that part of economics that makes everything make sense. So a couple of keys by the time you are done with this one. Understanding definition of price, and then getting a good look at what equilibrium looks like. That will help us to graph out this problem with supply and demand, or law of supply and law of demand not making any sense. And then price ceilings and price floors that we'll touch on in section 3, where we take a look at what the government does to try to make the price system work on its own. So let's start off with the definition for the term price. In particular, your book calls it a monetary value of a product, looking on page 137, as established by supply and demand. Supply and demand determine prices. Well, certainly the store sets prices in a free market economy. Since a store owns the property, they get to decide what to sell the property at. However, they set their prices based on what you will pay, what the demand level is. They set their prices based on supply. If there's too much supply, then they probably will lower their price. If there's not very much supply of a certain product and the scarcity goes up, a store will likely increase the price. So it is supply and demand that determine the price of a product more than any other factor. So that when you take a look at this graph, which will help to explain how the law of supply and demand do work together, what you'll have is at a higher price, 50 cents, you're not going to have a very high demand. All right? Your demand's going to be low, but you're going to have a very high supply. You have a lot of supply because they can make a lot of profit. So you're only going to be able to sell one, because no matter how many you offer, if you only have one demand, you only make one sale. Say, if the price drops down to 40 cents, you now have two people that want the product, and you supply 4 because it's not quite as profitable, so you shrink your supply to 4, but you still only have a sale of 2 because you only had 2 demands. So it doesn't matter how many you make for your supply, you're only going to have 2 purchases. And then you get down to 30 cents, drop your price to 30 cents. Now you're going to supply 3 because, again, your profit is reduced, but you're going to have an increased demand of 3, so you actually sell 3. Going in the opposite direction, and you lower your price to 20, you're going to have more people want it because the price is lower, but you are not going to want to sell as many because you can't make as much profit. So it doesn't matter if you have 1 million people who want the product. If you only supply 2, you only have 2 sales. And then finally, you lower your price to 10 cents, you may have everybody wants one, but you're not going to supply very many because you can't make a profit any longer. So it doesn't matter how many people you have that want it. If you only have one supply, that's all you sell. So in this case, the best outcome is going to be to charge 30 cents and produce 3 items so that all of your items get sold and everybody who wants one got one. You'd met all of the demand, you sold all of your supply, and people are happy. So this is how the law of demand and the law of supply work together. They kind of balance each other out. You may start off at 50 cents, but when that doesn't work, you may drop down to 20 cents. That didn't work, maybe try 40, and then you eventually settle on 30 cents, realizing that selling out everything that you made and fulfilling all the demand that's out there is a very good way to do business, and you're not wasting resources. The price system in a market economy works like this. It's very, very flexible. Your book uses the term flexible, looking on page 138. Prices in a market economy are flexible. They can just be changed. You can change them. If it's your product, your business, you get to make the decision. That's free enterprise. You get to make the decision, so you get to raise and lower the prices until finally you find the right price. Later on, maybe your item becomes more popular, and so maybe now you can raise the price and you can still fulfill the demand and make more profit because your item became popular. Maybe your item is no longer popular at all, so the consumer taste goes down, so your demand goes down, so now you get to lower the price and sell out all of your stock and perhaps make something else. Anyway, it's all your decision. Everything is up to you. In a market economy, prices don't really favor the buyer or the seller. They favor both of them, just depending on the situation. So we'll take a look at a lot of these different items, give some examples about how to graph these things. On page 139, your book talks about the idea of rationing. Prices have at times been rationed in our country's history. They are rationed in many places in the world right now. Most of the time when rationing happens, it's because we have some kind of a shortage going on. Gas shortages in the 1970s. Rationing is when typically a government is going to set the amount of a product you can buy because we don't have enough of a product. And so they don't want it to be all bought up by, let's say, the rich or by the corporations. They don't want it to be hoarded by whomever. So the government comes in and sets rationing levels. They did it a lot during World War II and World War I. We didn't have to do it really on the national level since. They almost did it, your book mentions, in the 70s with gasoline. There were some companies and even some states that decided to ration gasoline. So that made a difference. Anyway, the term rationing means just that everybody is going to get a certain amount of a certain product, typically because that product is now has a shortage. So you get a ration coupon, your book calls it, that tells you how much you get. You get 10 gallons of gas per week or something like that, and then you have to learn how to live on that much. Three problems that come along with rationing is, number one, determining what fair is. A family of 6 has more needs than a family of 2 or 3 people. A family with a mom and a dad that both work and have to get to work, and maybe both of them work downtown but they live in Siena. Well, now they're going to need some more gas than other families are going to need. So it's almost impossible to determine whatever this fair level of rationing is going to be. Second problem is administrative costs. If you could imagine trying to ration food in World War II like our government did, the Food and Drug Administration, trying to regulate all food, the amount of beef, the amount of sugar, the amount of flour, all these different things we were trying to gather and hold on to so we could send them to the troops over fighting in Europe and in Asia. So determining the fair amount for everybody, you had to hire millions of people, and those millions of people had to be paid with tax money to go out and enforce this rationing. So the administrative costs for a country like ours to ration anything is extremely high. And then the third one, and I'm going to argue probably the biggest one, is incentive. Because typically my incentive, my profit motive, to include the term we went over earlier, is that if I do put in the extra work, if I put in the extra time, that I can get extra profit. If I want to buy that 60-inch TV to have a Super Bowl party, then I can work a little bit extra and drive buses a little bit more, get a little bit extra money and save it. I can go buy that. But if TVs are being rationed, or if gasoline is being rationed and now we're not driving to games, and I might not have any incentive to do any extra. If I work extra hard and there is no benefit to working extra hard, all I'm doing is taking time away from my family, then my incentive is gone. So rationing tends to destroy incentive for somebody to work, for somebody to do extra, for somebody to work harder. Well, thankfully, we have not had very many instances in our country's history of this. There are countries that deal with this every single day. We really don't have to ration anything. And you can go to bed every single night and say a prayer to your Heavenly Father, thanking Him for such a blessing. 2 names on page 141. I do want you to be familiar with them. 2 of our great economists of the 20th century, Gary Becker being first, One probably biggest idea that Becker kind of came up with, and forgive me, I guess, for trying to boil it down too much, but that every single thing in your life, economics kind of has something to do with it. Now, I wouldn't agree every single thing, but hard to argue with a Nobel Prize winner, right? But his idea is that the choices that you make in your life, whether or not to have children, whether or not to have another child, whether or not to move to this area or that area, so much of what you decide has to do with economics. And a couple of the things that he wrote, one pamphlet that I read in college that he wrote, talked about if economics is going to affect your life, why not learn it and have a bigger impact on economics? Learn how to do it, learn how to affect it, learn how to, get a better credit rating, learn how to get a better price on a house. Why not learn how to do those things, since it's going to affect you the rest of your life? Milton Friedman is the second guy. This is Milton right here. Your book mentions that Milton Friedman was born in 1912, but it doesn't list a year for him passing. That's because your book is kind of old. Milton Friedman did pass away in 2006. But Milton Friedman, we're going to go with, he is a monetarist. A monetarist is somebody who does believe that the single most important thing in an economy, for making a good economy or a bad economy or a shifting economy back and forth, the number one thing is the money supply. And in the money supply, if the money supply is growing larger, if money supply, and let's go ahead and give it a title, usually our basic measurement of money in America is called M1. If M1 is growing larger, there's more money in the economy, that typically means our economy is growing. It means the economy is good, people have more jobs, and the more jobs mean more salaries, and people are earning more money. And if they're earning more money, well, by golly, we're Americans, we're going to spend more money. So as M1 grows, the economy grows along with it. The other thing could happen, we could have something like when 9/11 happened, and people in this country freaked out. And so for 2 years in a row, people in America were kind of afraid. They stopped spending. And when they stopped spending, it means stores started to close. Stores started to lay people off, less jobs, less money flowing through M1. And now M1 is shrinking. And that's kind of a signal of an economy that's slowing down. 2003, President Bush cut taxes. And when he cut the taxes, income taxes, people had more of their own money to keep. So M1 started to expand again. And that's kind of what happened. So anyway, a monetarist in particular is a person that believes that the amount of money in the economy is the number one factor in whether or not it's a good or a bad or a strong or a weak economy. That's a monetarist. One more thing about Friedman is that he believed that the money supply moves back and forth freely without anybody else's pushing or shoving, or the money supply works on its own when you and I buy things, and then businesses hire people, and it grows and it shrinks back and forth, but it does it without any outside help. Milton Friedman argued that it was impossible for a government or the Federal Reserve in the United States to affect M1 appropriately. That if the government tries to control the amount of money, or the Federal Reserve does, they have a lot of different tools that they can use to do this, but if it's done by the government or by the Federal Reserve, then mistakes are made and we have problems that are being caused by our government instead of solved by our government. Anyway, Milton Friedman said all this happens, all this money supply stuff happens naturally, and that we should let it happen naturally instead of trying to affect it with government taxing and spending, with government interest rates set by the Federal Reserve and stuff, all these different things. They should just forget it and stop, let the economy go, and the economy will kind of go up and down, but it will do so on its own without any outside help. Now, we have been talking in chapters 4 and 5, supply graphs, demand graphs, So we have our regular demand graphs here, and you remember that they go top left and they go down to the bottom right. They tend to, because the higher the price, the lower the quantity goes, right? So high prices go with low quantities, which is why you have a high price right here, but a very low quantity. That's the way that demand has typically gone. On the other hand, when it comes to supply, the higher prices go, the higher supply would go. Because at, let's call this $10, at $10, a business can make a lot more money than they can at, let's say, $1 or $2 down here. So it's much better for a business to have high prices. The problem with all of that was that as prices go higher, like here, that supply is going up, but demand at the exact same time is going down. So it seems that you're always going to have extra items left over. You're going to have very large inventories because you're making a lot of products, but nobody wants to buy them. At the same time, if the price of a product drops, you're going to have increasing demand, but decreasing supply. You're going to have a whole lot of demand, but not much supply. And that's bad also. A whole lot of people that want your product, but they can't get it because you're not making any more because you can't make a profit. So, what with is what we call equilibrium. And market equilibrium is going to tell you that there is a price, but remember, prices are flexible. Equilibrium will change. But at any point in time that there is a specific price that people will pay to get a certain item. So let's call this an equilibrium graph. I'm going to go back in time. Let's go equilibrium graph for Walkmans. If you don't know what a Walkman is, you need to get a little culture in your life. Walkmans. Of course, I'm talking to a generation that hardly knows what an iPod is. Walkman was a 1980s version of an iPod. Now we have, music on our phones and stuff. And by the time you're my age, music will be beamed down into your brain when you're born, and everything will be fine. But in the 80s, we called it a Walkman, right? So let's say when Walkmans first came out and they were awesome, let's say the equilibrium price was let's call it $25 to get a brand new Walkman. And back in the 80s, $25, that's a nice chunk of money right there. Most kids wouldn't have that one. So let's say at $25, businesses could supply, let's say 100 per week. And if they had 100 per week and set the price at 25, let's say they would sell out. Exactly 100 people would want it. So at $25 and 100 supply, 100 products made, 100 quantity here, you would have what we call equilibrium. And your book also calls it the market clearing price, because this price and this quantity, $25 and 100 quantity, it clears the market. In other words, you don't have any extra supply and you don't have any extra demand left over. Now, this is very, very hard to reach, partly because all of this is going to be very flexible. Things are going to shift. So let's say you come out with the very first Walkman ever and you're charging $25 and you're selling 100, but then a competitor comes in. Well, all of a sudden now with a competitor, you can't do the same thing. So you have to shift your price down to like $20. Now at $20, now your equilibrium will be $20 instead of $25. And maybe instead of 100 quantity, maybe your new equilibrium is going to be 75, because now there's a competitor selling the same product. Okay, maybe all of a sudden the Walkman is no longer cool because the iPod comes out. So now you lower your price to $10, you make 10 products and you still can't sell them because you're not cool anymore. Whatever the case is, the point here is that this will change. Market equilibrium changes. But this is what the graph looks like. Now you've got your demand line, you've got your supply line, and wherever it is they meet, there's your equilibrium price and your equilibrium quantity. whatever those ones are. So these graphs are set up the same way. Here's your price, here's your quantity, supply lines, demand lines, all that's the same. Just make sure now we're marking equilibrium. Now on our graphs, for our purposes, you want to make sure that you mark your S and your D. Make sure you mark those. You can be at the top or at the bottom of the line is fine. But now let's start marking equilibrium. Let's just mark equilibrium as X. The main reason you're going to mark that is because equilibrium is going to change. In a few minutes, we'll show another way to do a graph. Equilibrium does shift higher and lower when supply and demand lines move. So this is equilibrium. At some point, for every single product that is made, there is a place where the supply and the demand are going to meet. And that's the price and that's the quantity that's best for a company to make under regular circumstances, right? Ceteris paribus. If everything stays the same, that's the price and the quantity that a business wants to produce at and charge for their price. But let's say that a business decides that they're not going to charge that one regular price. And let's go ahead and call this $10 and 100 quantity right here. The business decides, I think this is, I think it's better. I think my product's really good. So a business decides that they're going to raise their price to $11 instead of $10. They're going to raise it to $11. If they raise their price to $11 and the equilibrium price is 10, then what they're going to end up doing is that their demand is going to fall, and you'll notice demand has fallen from 100 to about, let's call this 85, but their supply is going to go up because now they stand to make more profit, so they're encouraged to make more items. So now their supply has increased to, let's call it 115. So when the supply is higher than the demand, you're producing, in this case, you're producing 115, but you've only got 85 demanded. I refer you back to that little graph we did at the beginning of this podcast, that you have 115 supply, but only 85 buyers. You're only going to sell 85, which means you have a leftover of 30. A leftover, in this case, we're going to call it a surplus. Any price that you charge that is above equilibrium is going to result in a surplus. Let's say you jack your price up to $13. $13. Now you'll notice your demand is way down here. Your demand, let's say, is now 60, but your supply, because you stand to make a lot more money, your supply has jumped up to, say, 130. Well, if your supply is 130, but your demand is only 60, you've got a surplus of 70 left over. That's not going to be good. So you're losing demand, but you are making more. Now, you don't have to make more, but the idea is the law of supply tells you that if there's more money to be made, if you can profit more from a certain item, that you tend to want to make more of that item. Now, on the other hand, if you do the same thing, if this is our same $10 price and this is still 100 quantity, let's say you decide, let's have a sale. I'm going to knock this thing down to $9. My new price is $9. And at $9, you're not going to make as many products, so you knock down your supply to, let's just call it 90. If I can draw a 90. But because the price is lower, your demand has jumped up to, let's say, 105. So your demand is 105, but you're only supplying 90. So refer back to that original graph we talked about, that you're only going to sell 90 because, well, you only have 90. You can't sell more than what you have. So you produce 90, you sell 90, you've got 15 people who want your product but cannot buy it. That results in what you call a shortage. You drop your price down here to, let's say, 7, and at 7 you're going to only want to supply about 60 items, but you're going to have a lot more demand. Let's say you've got your 130 demand. Now you've got 130 demand, but only 60 products. So you're going to sell out of 60, but you've got 70 people that wanted your product but couldn't get your product. That's not good. You created demand. You created desire for your product, but you don't have any products. So what are those people going to do? They're going to go somewhere else and spend their money at some other place. So you're generating demand for other companies. They should send you a thank you card, a Christmas card, or a birthday card, or something to say thank you for creating demand for us. Then that's what you're doing, hurting your company by not fulfilling the demand. So all of those prices are probably bad ideas to charge. Now, some situations might change, but ceteris paribus, what you want in this case is you want to charge $10 and make 100 products, at least for now. If everything stays the same, you want to charge $10 and make 100 products, and you're going to clear out the market. If you don't, if you charge any price that is above equilibrium, you're going to end up with a surplus. If you charge any price below equilibrium, you're going to have a shortage as the result. Keep those in mind. One easy way to remember it, I remember this all the way back from college, is that if it's above equilibrium, up, you have a surplus. Plus, think plus, it's above. All right? If it's below equilibrium, you have a shortage. Below, it's down. All right? So plus, above, short, below equilibrium. It should help you to remember those items. Now we'll take a look at what happens now when the entire curve is going to shift, because so far what we've been looking at in Chapter 6 is the price effect, as prices change and quantities change and finding equilibrium. But now, let's say we've just found equilibrium, right? That's equilibrium. There's your X right there. So you've got your supply, you've got your equilibrium, and you've got your demand, and you're happy, and everything is good. But then something changes. Now remember in chapters 4 and 5, we had those situations we had a change in supply and a change in demand graph. That's when like the entire curve shifted, right? So here's your demand, here's your D, and then something happened and it made the demand curve shift. So now you've got D2. So that's what we're looking at here, but now we're going to see how that same thing affects price and quantities. For instance, here's your equilibrium. Everything is fine. Let's say you got your $10 price. You've got your 100 quantity right here. And let's say all of a sudden your product goes crazy in demand because it was on a Super Bowl commercial and everybody saw it, and they had your favorite singer was on this commercial, and everybody in the whole wide world wants one now. So demand, because of consumer tastes, demand is going to increase. Notice real quick what happens when demand increases, and this is probably something that makes a lot of sense. And we're going to change a little bit real quick. We're going to change a little bit on the lines. We're going to change because the more research I do, the more I realize that what your book does with the lines is probably a little bit more in line with what colleges are teaching now. So we're going to leave this as D. Okay, and then when we make a new one, we're going to call this D1. Okay, we're going to call that one D1. And you'll notice that when demand increases, you'll notice what happens to price. Because right here you have P and you have Q, and now your new P, and we're going to call this P1, your new price has increased. And now your quantity is eventually going to increase with that. So now you're Q1, and now this is X1. Things have changed. Because the demand for your product went up, demand shifted to the right, your product became more popular, allowing you now to raise the price of that product. Now remember back in chapter 4, we started this off, and we said that the price effect graph measures when price changes and it affects demand. And I told you that later on we're going to find out what happens when demand or when supply change, how they're going to affect prices and quantities. So no longer are we talking about changing a price and that's changing supply and demand. Now it's the demand and the supply that is changing. And because the demand and the supply change inside of a market, because now in this case tastes increased, so now the market wants more of this product, which means you have to make more of this product, and now you can raise the price of this product. Let's take another example real quick. Let's say the opposite happens. So here's your original X, your original equilibrium. So now the opposite happens. Somebody endorses a product, but nobody likes that person, and that person is found out to be a criminal of some sort, and blah, 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 and nobody likes your product anymore. So your product is now has less of a taste. People don't want it. So here's your D2, your D1, your D prime, whatever you want to call it. Here's your D line, and now you'll notice the equilibrium price, here's your X1, equilibrium price has decreased. Okay, it's gone from here down to here. Here's your new equilibrium price, and because your demand has gone down, you will eventually knock down your supply as well. So when your demand decreased for whatever reason, same 6 determinants that were in chapter 4, when demand decreased, the equilibrium decreases. In fact, in this case, both price and quantity equilibriums decreased. So demand's kind of easy when you try to figure out prices and quantities increasing and decreasing, because in both cases, if demand increases, then both, here's your X and your X1, both price and quantity increase. If demand increases, both price and quantity increase. If demand decreases, here's your original equilibrium, here's your new equilibrium. If demand decreases, this is your your D1, both price and quantity decrease. They both go together, and they both go in the same direction as demand. Demand goes up, both of them go up. Demand goes down, both of them end up going down. So you need to be able to explain that and be able to explain why it is that those things happen. Same thing for your supply. And we've still got some people not understanding supply, that this right here is indeed an increase in supply. It's to the right because we're measuring quantity here. So it's an increase in supply. I've still got some people drawing a line over here and saying that that's an increase because it's higher up. Remember, we're not measuring price. We're not measuring price. We're measuring quantity. So in this case, here's your equilibrium right here. Start with X in equilibrium. And let's say that the cost of inputs for your product decreases, allowing you to increase your supply. Because the cost of inputs goes down, you have more money, so you decide to increase your supply. So now here is your S1, and you'll notice that X1 has changed. Please notice that it's not in the same direction like it was with demand. Now your new equilibrium price and your new equilibrium quantity are not going in the same direction. Your equilibrium price has dropped from P to P1, and your equilibrium quantity has increased from Q to Q1. Now the quantity is easy, because if your supply goes up, obviously your quantity supplied is going to go up. That's logical. It has to. If supply goes up, duh. But on the price side, if your supply increases, your equilibrium price tends to go down. Not always, but ceteris paribus, your equilibrium price will decrease. Why do you think equilibrium prices go down when supply goes up? You know the answer. If you remember way back in the very first day of economics, we talked about this thing. The answer, the main answer, will be scarcity. Because if you produce more and more and more of your products are no longer scarce. Everybody can have one. If everybody can have one, there's no real scarcity to it. It doesn't really matter. Easy to get one, so prices are going to be a lot lower. So if you do produce more products, your equilibrium price will tend to drop. Now remember, this is an economic model. Not everything is true. It's not always true. But this is a model to show how these things tend to work. So some of these that I did at college were really confusing to think through, but step by step you can fill things like this out and you'll understand. If for whatever reason, Super Bowl commercial, the popularity of your product increases, here's your D1. Therefore, if the popularity increases, so does the equilibrium price. All right? But then at the same time, if the popularity increases, so a month from now you increase the supply, so after you've increased the demand to D1, now you increase your supply to S1, you'll notice that the equilibrium price is back down to normal, but your equilibrium quantity now is higher. Okay? So then things get even better, and people just can't get enough of your product, so now you've got your S2 over here, and equilibrium quantity obviously has still gone higher, but you've created a new equilibrium X2, and your price has now gone down. But then whoever's been sponsoring your product, you find out that they actually like the Dallas Cowboys, so nobody likes the Dallas Cowboys. So now the demand for your product goes down. So now you go from S2 to a D2. And now your equilibrium is way down here. Your X3 is way down there. And now nobody's really happy. Right? You're not making as much money, customers don't like it as much. Anyway, this whole thing can get kind of messy. Just be able to kind of go through the levels. What happens here? Tell me what happens to equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, or just PQ. What happens to PQ if the supply of your product decreases? After it decreases, what happens if the demand increases? Just be able to kind of think out a map about what happens when different actions take place. And that'll show that you do understand these prices, equilibrium prices going up and going back down again. So it wouldn't be a good chapter of economics if we didn't have a really, really deep economic term that's really simple to understand, but really makes you sound smart if you say it. For this chapter, the competitive price theory will be that very thing. This part up here, this is okay, blah, 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 blah. The most important thing to remember for competitive price theory is these two parts right here. First of all, in order to be competitive, businesses lower their prices first. It's the easiest way to compete. If you're the only seller of a certain product in an area and a competitor moves in next door, you could try to make a better product. You could try to hire better workers, but probably the easiest and most quickest way to compete with another store is to lower your prices. And then after you do that, now you try to find a way to keep your costs down. So businesses compete first with prices. That's the easiest way to compete with other businesses. But they also try a way to cut costs, and eventually they can probably work on their quality. But prices won't go down too far, because eventually now you and I, now the buyers are going to compete to make sure the prices don't go down so far that they can't make any money. So while they're lowering their prices, they can't lower their price so low that they're not making any money. If you recall marginal cost. If the marginal cost to produce an item is $1.50, and they're charging $5 for that item, and they lower it to $4 and to $3 and to $2, well, they're not going to lower it to $1 because nobody makes any money there. So you and I arguing, when they drop that down from $5 to $3, now you and I are interested. And now that whole demand curve shifts over to the right, and that's going to increase the equilibrium price. And so now they're going to say, yay, we're making more. So eventually, me and you, our demand for the product will increase and we'll push those prices higher. So these prices, they go up and down. Think Friedman here, Milton Friedman, that this all happens, all of this happens without any direction whatsoever. All of these things take place naturally. businesses competing with price and with quality and with resources. Your book mentions this, and so do most other definitions and other textbooks, that competitive prices help to allocate resources efficiently, that one business can't hoard them all because if the prices are too low, they can't afford to make we use all the resources, and so on and so on. Anyway, this whole idea, this competitive price theory, is a good move. It's a good way to think of things, that prices are set by a companies with competing with each other, companies trying to cut their costs and control their prices, and prices are also set by you and I competing with each other. We're competing because I want the best price, so I'm going to go somewhere else and they'll give me the best price. Great. But if you find that deal first, then you get that price and I have to pay the higher price, and so we're in competition as well. And remember, all this happens in a market economy by itself. But then, dun dun dun, unfortunately, our government gets involved. Our government decides that things are not going as well as they would like them to. Our government has certain social goals, and I'm not going to say they're all horrible. I'll bring some Frederick Bastiat in for you here, where he says that he doesn't think that the government hates the country or hates people. The government just thinks they know better than you do. They think that they can control things better than the market can. So the government jumps in with their own plans to try to solve things. Two of those plans, we have price ceilings and price floors. Let's talk price ceiling first. Just like it sounds, a price ceiling means that there's a certain price that businesses cannot go over. You can't go above this price, not allowed. You can't charge prices above this one. It's a price ceiling. Price floor will just be obviously the opposite. So a price ceiling might or might not be dangerous depending on the situation. So let's use our same old situation as before. A $10 price and a 100 quantity, and everybody's happy at X. Everything is good. Supply and demand haven't changed, but then the government comes along and says, you know what, we want to put a $15 price ceiling on this product of yours. Well, a $15 price ceiling probably doesn't have any impact. It probably doesn't bother you because you don't want to charge 15, you want to charge 10. So you're fine, right? But then the government says, you know what, everybody should have some of your product. You're charging too much, so the government sets a price ceiling of $5. Well, now you got a problem, because at $5, and this is your your demand line, this is your supply line, at $5, you're not going to produce as many because you can't afford to do this because your costs are too high, or your marginal costs are too high. But now everybody's going to want more. More people are going to want your product. So you're going to have a high demand quantity, but you're not going to supply very many. And with a high demand and a low supply, you have a shortage. So in this case, the government has produced an artificial shortage. I say artificial because it didn't happen with the market prices. It didn't happen with you making a mistake and charging too low of a price. In this case, the government came along and said our price ceiling is going to be $5, and they created this shortage. The government did. And if this is the case, now we've got some problems you're going to have to deal with. Maybe you're going to stop making this product altogether. Now, the same thing would happen with a floor. Real quick, just kind of scratch that out. Let's talk price floors. Let's say a price floor comes along. Here's your product, $10 and 100 quantity, and you're happy, and everything is good because here's equilibrium. You're selling out, you're making money, and everybody's happy. But the government says we need to make sure that some social goals are met. So the government comes along and says we're going to set a price floor at $5. Well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt you, right? Because you don't care. You're not going to lower your price to $5. A price floor means you can't go below that. Well, you don't want to go below that. You want to charge 10. But what happens when the government says the price floor is 15? Now, you might say, why would the government set a price floor or any price floor at all? Well, certain things like minimum wage. Minimum wage is $7.25 now nationally. Some cities and some states have a higher minimum wage, but some states don't. Some states leave it at $7.25. In other words, a business can't pay you less than $7.25 for your product, which is your labor. Some other things like agricultural products are a big one here. The government sets these price floors that you can't pay less or you can't charge less than a certain price for an agricultural good. Well, in this case, if the government sets a price floor at $15, your demand is going to go way down because people are going to say, I don't have a demand for this product anymore. I don't have the ability to buy, or I'm not willing to spend $15 on this item. But the supply might go way up. One of the best examples of this is minimum wage. And your book mentions this one, but minimum wage, if the government was to go all Bernie Sanders on us and to increase minimum wage up to $15 an hour, if they were to do that one, you would have a problem because you would not have that much high of a demand for labor, because a lot of small businesses and a lot of businesses that depend on unskilled labor, they're going to say, okay, I can't afford to hire 50 minimum wage workers. I can only afford to hire 20 or 30 minimum wage workers. So now your demand for minimum wage workers has gone way down from 100, say, per week to like 50 per week. On the other hand, the supply will go way up. Now people are going to think, hey, I can make $15 an hour. Some people who haven't worked in years are going to say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get a job now. So the supply of $15 an hour labor is going to go up. Some people are going to say, I'm even going to drop out of school if I can make $15 an hour. You're going to make somewhere, $35,000 to $40,000 a year. That might make you incentivized enough to go make some more money. So anyway, the supply of labor at $15 will be very, very high, but the demand for $15 labor will be very, very low. So what you've done is you've created a very large surplus of $15 an hour labor. A lot of people want to work at $15 an hour, but not many businesses can afford $15 an hour. Anyway, that's kind of these artificial price ceilings and price floors that the government set. Now, the good news is that our government really doesn't do that very much. The government has done that with rent controls, especially in places like New York City and LA, where the government said rent is just way, way too high and we need to control that. Government has done that with agricultural prices and minimum wage, but it really hasn't done a lot of this, so it really hasn't gotten in the way of the market very much at all. Now, last slide that we have, speaking of agricultural goods, because the government has been so involved with the price of agricultural goods and supplies and how many farmers can make them and so on and so on. And it's actually a pretty interesting study. If you ever do an economic study in this area, pricing, do some research about what things were being done in the Great Depression. Like milk prices were too low, so milk farmers couldn't make any money. So the government had milk farmers dump their milk out on the ground because that shrunk the supply of milk, which made the price go higher. So instead of like giving that milk away to starving people or trying to find another way to use that milk, the government just had them dump it on the ground. I mean, that was one of the programs that they did. Anyway, it's an interesting research study if you ever have to do something in that area. Real quick over these ones, your target prices, just like it says, the government believes, let's say a bushel of corn is going for $12, but the government sets a target price of $15. The government believes 15 is where it should be, but the price is only 12. That means the government is going to take steps to try to increase the price up to that target price where the government believes that it ought to be. Not the market, but the government believes it. Now, some of these other next two items both deal directly with target prices. A non-recourse loan is kind of just a gift. In fact, a non-recourse loan is very similar to just a direct subsidy because you don't really have to pay a non-recourse loan back. Your book says it's a loan that carries neither a penalty nor further obligation to repay if not paid back. So, what would happen often, well, it's kind of a weird system set up, especially with these loans that either you would use the loan to plant your crop, and then you'd give the government your crop and keep the money from the loan as payment, or you'd sell your crop and you'd keep part of it and pay part of the loan back if you could. It's a weird system that was set up. But just kind of understand the idea of a non-recourse loan. When I was in high school in Indiana, I remember they didn't use this term, but I remember some of the farm dads that I knew talking about this and sitting around and laughing about them. Like, I can't believe the government's giving us money to pretty much do nothing. It's just like we're getting paid to not work. They loved them. Another one is a deficiency payment. In a deficiency payment, it's kind of the same idea as the non-recourse loans that the government was giving out. The idea for a deficiency payment is, let's say in the non-recourse loan, let's say the farmer makes all of his crops, and then he just gives them to the government. Well, now the government has all these possession of all these crops, doesn't really know what to do with them. So the government would start to give them out. Your book mentions like free lunch programs and give them out to like soup kitchens. And the government would just give these things out for free. But they still ended up with these gigantic surpluses because they keep getting more wheat and more corn. So they ended up with these giant surpluses of food that would often just go to waste. So to kind of change gears a little bit and kind of steer away from the non-recourse loans a little bit, what the government would do was to tell the farmer, just do the best you can, and whatever you don't get, we'll just, give you more. So let's say a farmer normally gets, let's say, $48,000 for his his corn crops, and let's say because of a drought or because of low prices, he only gets $21,000. The government, because it loves you so much, would just give you $27,000 in a deficiency payment, and ta-da, you get $48,000. Remember, of course, that the government doesn't have a part-time job, so this deficiency payment had to come from either taxpayers or from debt, and during the Great Depression, these came from debt. We are kind of getting rid of a lot of these kinds of things. We are kind of changing gears a little bit. There are still farm subsidies, no doubt. There are still some supports for farmers, but unfortunately, all these things that the government had been doing had an effect on the market. For instance, let's say in the market, the price for a bushel of corn was at $12, and farmers were producing, 1,000 bushels of corn per week or something like that. If that was what the market wanted, but the government said we need to set a target price, the target price at $15 per bushel, well, you could see that demand is going to fall to this level. Right? Your quantity has fallen, but that now farmers are like, target price of 15, we can make a lot more money. That would encourage farmers to actually make more. So your supply would go up while your demand goes down, and now you've got a problem. Now you've got that surplus because you've got a lot of extra things. And that's what happened with a lot of these. And the same thing happened with so many other products where the market was artificially manipulated with target prices, and then of course other things happened that hurt the economy, deficiency payments and more debt and so on, and so many of these things just kind of added up. Anyway, you get the idea. We'll practice a lot of these things in class.